welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and once again, I'm going to be talking about my own personal decks. It's sort of an annual thing for me. I did my original personal decks video about 2 years ago. I think it was around March, and that is still currently the most viewed video on my channel, so people obviously like hearing me talk about these things. I did an update of this last year where I just did an update on things I have changed about my decks I got rid of, decks I added. Things have changed a lot between the first two videos, changed a little bit since the last video, and I decided to do it a little bit differently this time. I'm going to do a couple of things differently. First of all, I'm going to be ranking my decks. So I'm doing this in two ways. I'm ranking them by power level. What I think the power level is, obviously the ranking structure in Casual Commander is not entirely accurate. What the power level is that I think, but more so I'm going to be ranking them in the appeal for me. So the decks that I like to play the most. So the deck at the top of this list is going to be the deck that I just tend to go towards. I always love playing that deck, right? The decks at the top of this list are the ones that I just prefer to play for whatever reason. I'm not even sure what it is, to be honest. I was just going through my decks and thinking, which deck am I going to grab if I'm going to play a game? Which deck do I just tend to grab first, right? And then obviously the ones at the bottom are going to be the ones that I don't really love so much that I possibly even might consider taking apart eventually. The other thing I'll be doing differently is actually showing you the paper decks. I have them all right here, sort of sorted out, and I had a few requests from people to actually show the actual paper decks. So I won't actually be talking about any digital versions of decks. I do have digital versions of decks. I always have at least 3 or 4 decks always on the go that I'm currently working on that I am putting together in paper. That is, for me, the biggest suggestion I could make for anyone who likes building decks and coming up with new ideas is do it in a digital version. There's lots of different ways to do that. And, obviously that way you don't really have to purchase the actual cards, and you can make the adjustments before you actually put it together in paper. It saves you a lot of time, a lot of money. I do that a lot. Obviously I make a lot of decks, so I do a lot of play testing before I actually put decks together in paper. The other little shout out I will give is to my Patreon. And, if you are interested in watching me play any of these decks, I do so on my Patreon a lot. I play games on the Discord via Spell Table with my patrons all the time. And I have, in the last couple of months, have been recording all the games I play, and I post them all on my Patreon. So if you want to actually see these decks in action, you can join my Patreon to do so. I also do deck techs, deck doctors on there, depending on your tier level. So the link for that is in the description if you're interested, but let's get to it. So first up is my Shanna deck. And Shanna is, I have this really awesome etched foil one that looks really super sweet. Shanna is a, when I first saw this commander, it's a little boring. Can't be the target of abilities your opponents control, which is sort of like really bad hexproof. And it actually comes in handy though, more than you would think. Like if someone cast a Ravenous Chupacabra, for example, that's an ability your opponents control, can't target your commander, right? So it does come in handy quite a bit. Has power and toughness equal to the amount of creatures you control. And I thought, here's a creature that is really cheap, a commander that's really cheap, only costs 2 mana, and it has the potential to get really big, right? So I started out the idea for this deck, and I will get into what the deck is doing and then why I have it ranked at the bottom. First of all, the power level, it's actually pretty decent. I have this at a 6, not bad, but I have it ranked the lowest as far as decks that I actually want to play, and I'm considering taking it apart for a number of reasons. I'll get to that. I got cards like Tender Shroot Dryad in here, obviously great for token making. You are in a go wide strategy here. I got more interesting ones like Master of the Wild Hunt. Lots of creatures that are just spitting out tokens to have more creatures in play so that my commander gets bigger. I also have ones like Silverwing Squadron, which is a creature that is spitting out tokens, but also cares about the number of creatures in play, because its power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures that I control. So I have a few creatures like that as well that are sort of copying what my commander is doing. But then what am I doing? Well, the idea for the deck became, I have this cheap commander that can get really, really big. So I can cast a spell like Momentous Fall, which will, obviously care about the power and toughness of my commander, because when I sacrifice it, I'm going to draw cards equal to its power, gain life equal to its toughness. And I have a cheap commander, so I can sack it repeatedly and draw lots of cards, possibly gain life, and then not have too much of an issue getting it out again. Greater Good is another fantastic card that way, where I'm going to draw cards equal to my commander's power. So I have a commander that's cheap. I have a whole bunch of like little token creatures in play, so it's going to be like a 7 or 8 power. I can attack with it, sure, but I can also sacrifice it and draw a ton of cards, refill my hand. I also have cards like Traverse the Outlands, other cards that care about power, right? This is going to allow you to search your library for the X basic land cards, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. So I do have a lot of, powers matters kinds of stuff. Dragon Throne of Tarkir is another great one that I can equip onto my commander, because your commander is just mostly a big vanilla creature, and then I can tap my commander. My commander won't attack, but I'll tap my commander, give my entire team +X, and trample until end of turn. So that's a great way to close out games. I also have really interesting cards like Feed the Pack, which will allow me to sacrifice my commander to make more tokens. So I can sacrifice my commander, make a giant army of wolf tokens, and then cast my commander again, and my commander's even bigger the next time I cast it, right? So I have stuff like that as well. Fungal Sprouting is a great one that way, where it's going to create a number of Saproling tokens equal to my commander's power. So this just, obviously I want a creature with a big power, but then I get even more tokens, so it essentially doubles my commander's power. Lots of stuff like that. Obviously you have to be protecting your team, so I got Dauntless Escort. I got lots of board weight protection in this deck. One of the issues with this deck is it just became a go wide strategy, and I actually had it recently added Queen Alanil of Rudak, which one of my patrons suggested replacing as the commander, which is very similar, has power and toughness equal number of creatures you control, and is the token theme, right? And this deck inadvertently became a token strategy, and that sort of gummed up the works a lot. I got Parallel Lives in there and stuff like that, and it became, I'm doing too many things a little bit. It also just became a go wide strategy where I'm just attacking with my creatures, little on the boring side. It's always a deck that I liked, and people would compliment me on it because it was kind of an interesting way to go with this commander. But at the end of the day, it really is kind of boring, and I don't love playing it. I seriously considering taking it apart. I don't know if I'll go in a similar direction with another commander or not, but at the end of the day, I'd say it's for sure my least favorite deck to play. All right, next up is Gerard Weatherlight Hero, my Boros deck. And when I first saw this commander, as I've talked about before on this channel, I thought it was fairly obvious the direction you want to go, and I'm actually kind of surprised it's not a more popular commander. When it dies, you can exile it, and this worked really great with the original dies rules for commanders, because you couldn't get a dies trigger from your commander if you were sending it back to the command zone, but it worked here because your commander would go to the graveyard and then you would exile it, then you could put it back in the command zone. That's not an issue now anyway, but you're just going to return all your creatures and artifacts to play, right? And so I thought, well, board wipe tribal, sort of, so a card like Chroma's Vengeance is perfect here, where it's just going to destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. I destroy everyone else's stuff, and mine obviously as well, but then when my commander dies, I get all my stuff back. And that strategy works particularly good in an ETB strategy, which I love, and as you'll see as I go through these decks, I have a lot of decks that are doing the sort of ETB strategy, but in different ways. So a card like Circuit Mender, for example, which I recently added to this deck, is a perfect fit in this deck. I mean, it's an artifact and a creature, and I have a sort of an artifact sub-theme in this deck. Has an ETB, also has a leaves the battlefield trigger as well, right? So I'm getting lots of, it's just a value-y deck where I'm board wiping, I'm getting value off of my creatures, right? I got creatures like Skyclave, Apparition, just creatures with really good ETBs, so that when I'm getting them back, I mean, I get the value out of getting my creatures back, but I get added value as well. I also have artifacts that are doing the same, like Ichor Wellspring, right? I have my Ichor Wellspring, enters the battlefield, I draw a card, I destroy it, I draw a card, it comes back into play because my Gerard is going to get my artifacts back as well. Coveted Jewel is another fantastic card in the strategy because it has that great ETB. It also works extra well because I am in a sacrifice artifact theme, and obviously I don't want to have my opponent stealing this from me. So I have one of my favorite cards of all time in this deck, is one of the reasons why I put the deck together, which is Goblin Welder, which I can then sacrifice my Coveted Jewel at instant speed if I'm worried about losing it, and then obviously swap it with something else. And that became the sub-theme of the deck, which is a sacrifice artifact theme. And one of the things I almost always get with this deck is Oblivion Stone, right? If I have my Goblin Engineer, I'll go get Oblivion Stone, throw it in my graveyard, immediately get it back, which will then be board wiping, and I can sort of repeat the process a little bit. And I think people are starting to realize why this deck is not super fun to play against. That's why I have it rated low as far as a deck I like to actually play. Power level, it's pretty good. Like I would, again, I'd say probably a 6. It used to be more powerful. I actually won quite a bit of games with this because I had more board wipes. It was just a lot of board wiping. A lot of board wiping going on, a lot of recursion theme. I'd have backups like Brought Back and stuff like that, face reward cards that would, simulate what my commander is doing. Obviously, when Gerard's Hourglass Pendant came out, that immediately went into the deck. It's named after my commander for a reason, and it's doing a very similar thing. And obviously, it's an artifact as well, so it fits that theme. It's a little boring and it's a little bit unfun to be board wiping. I ended up taking some of the board wipes out of the deck because it wasn't super fun, and for that reason it made it not as good, so I started winning less. Interestingly enough, this is the other deck of mine that I'm considering not necessarily taking apart, but I'm going to make some changes. I'm currently playtesting a deck which is Boros, that is, because I love the theme, the recursion artifact theme and all that. Currently working on a deck that I might replace the commander, so Gerard would no longer be the commander, and I would replace some of the cards, but the main part of the deck I think would remain the same. So stay tuned for that. There may be an update. All right, moving on to my Tashana deck, which is one of my oldest decks. I think it's probably my second oldest deck. And as you can see here, this is a proxy. I have a couple of decks that I have a proxy card as my commander. This really cool art. I had this card made that I added on here. I just really don't like the original. That's the only reason why. I don't do this a lot, but with the case with Tashana and one other commander, I just really don't like the original. And it's your commander, right? So personalizing your deck, nothing wrong with that. So this deck is, again, very simple. This was my original sort of ETB deck, and the crux of this deck is I'm just playing a lot of creatures, and it ended up being just some of my favorite creatures of all time. Like Eternal Witness is probably my favorite creature of all time, which obviously easily slots into this deck because it has maybe the best ETB of all time. Wall of Blossoms is another one of my personal favorite that I used to play back in the day that I thought nice fit in this deck. It's essentially an ETB blink strategy. Coiling Oracle, another one of my all-time favorite creatures, just easy fit in this deck. So that became the crux of the deck. Obviously, my commander wants me, again, to have lots of creatures in play. And also, because I'm drawing cards equal to the number of creatures I control, and also has an ETB, right? It's the ETB is I get to draw a bunch of cards. So that fit with what the deck is doing. I also have another one of my favorite creatures of all time, which is Mystic Snake. I love this card. So the deck became, it's an ETB strategy, but also I'm just playing some of my favorite creatures of all time. I also have some neat interactions in here, like with Summoner's Pact. Interestingly enough, Summoner's Pact is an instant, which casting it at instant speed isn't usually that big of an advantage, except if you have your Mystic Snake, right? Because I can, for 0 mana, go get my instant Mystic Snake at instant speed and then cast it at instant speed if my opponent is casting an Expropriate or something like that. So that's pretty neat. I also have a backup for that strategy in Frilled Mystic because, of course, they printed another card that essentially does the exact same thing. So that's the crux of the deck. And then when Modern Horizons 2 came out, I actually, because the deck was a little on the boring side, I went with a snow theme because I got really great ETB creatures like Ice Fang Coatl that fit in the theme of what I was doing that I wanted to play, but I needed snow permanents as well. So I put a little bit of a snow theme in there. Abominable Treefolk is another one that just a really neat creature, has a pretty interesting ETB that fit in the deck. So I swapped out all my lands. Pretty sure that's, other than the couple of snow creatures and the lands, those are the only snow permanents in the deck, but it does work. So I have snow lands in the deck. Obviously, I have blinking stuff as well, like Thassa Deep Dwelling and Conjurer's Closet and stuff like that. I also have just some straight up blink spells like Ghostly Flicker, which will flicker my creatures. And, I can get into a situation, as I often do in this deck, where I flicker my Eternal Witness and one other creature, like say a Rex Sage, get the ETBs, and then when my Eternal Witness ETBs, I get the Ghostly Flicker back, and I can get into a cycle where I constantly repeat it, or I can keep blinking my commander over and over again so that I can keep drawing cards. It's actually a really powerful deck. I have as well token creation like Cackling Counterpart, which works with the ETB theme, where I just create a token copy of my Eternal Witness or my whatever, and I can repeat the process. I've added a couple of interesting cards recently, like Titan of Industry, just great ETB creature, right? Because that's really all I'm doing in the deck. And also from Warhammer 40k, as soon as I saw Lord of Change, I was like, okay, there's a creature that when it ETBs, I get to draw 3 cards. So obviously that's going to go in the deck. And I have a really interesting combo in the deck as well. With Crafty Cutpurse, because Crafty Cutpurse is actually a great card. Your opponents are creating tokens all the time, even just treasure tokens. So if you can blink your Crafty Cutpurse over and over and over again, it can be really, really good against certain strategies. And since I was doing that, I also threw one of my favorite combos in here with Rampage of the Clans, because if you have the mana open, and of course your Crafty Cutpurse has flash, and this is instant speed, it's 8 mana total, but it ends up being 8 mana. You almost just win the game, because at instant speed, you can cast your Crafty Cutpurse and then Rampage the Clans, destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and then you get all the Centaur tokens. So you end up getting a giant army of Centaurs that on your turn you can untap and for sure at least kill one person, maybe a couple. So that's a really neat combo I ended up throwing in the deck. It is a very, very powerful deck, probably my most powerful. I don't lose with it very often. I have it as an 8, so about as powerful as you can get with a casual deck. I can deal with what my opponents are doing. Obviously I have counter spells. I got lots of removal. I'm always being able to deal with what my opponents are doing. Crazy good value. Just a little boring, I guess. Maybe just because I've had it for a long time, I'm a little bored with it. I'm sort of like, I just don't go after it a lot. I like playing it, but it's definitely not a deck that I'm going to go after if I want to play it. So, that's why I have it a little bit lower on this list. All right, moving on to my Rain Academy Chancellor deck. And this is just another creature from back in the day that I just thought was great. I love the art and everything. And of course, I want to be casting auras on my commander in order to get the benefit of the ability, and stuff like False Demise is fantastic because, of course, I want to protect my commander on top of having it enchanted, right? I want to take the benefit of both of these. So of course, if someone ends up targeting my commander, I get to draw the cards. And then also if my commander dies, I get it back, right? I don't want to be casting my commander over and over again. Probably the best one in the deck is Vanishing, because obviously it's an aura. I cast this on my commander and I don't want my commander to die, obviously, but also I want my stuff to be targeted. That's the really difficult part about this deck, is you want to keep your stuff around, but at the same time you want your stuff to be targeted, and phasing works extra good here because someone can target my commander. I get the trigger off of it, and then I can respond by phasing it out. So of course it's not going to die. So I have a lot of stuff like that. There actually is a few cards like Rootwater Shaman that actually work in the mono blue aura theme, which is kind of funny. I added Defiler of Dreams to this deck recently because it actually works here, because I'm casting a lot of blue permanents, right? The auras I'm casting are permanents. So this is actually a blue deck with a heavy permanent theme, so that works. Obviously, the best card in the deck is going to be Spellskite. Because I want my stuff to be targeted, I have to make it so that my stuff gets targeted, because people will just not target your stuff. I mean, not having your stuff targeted is good, obviously, a lot of times, but at the same time, you kind of want your stuff to be targeted so that you can draw the cards. And for that reason, Spellskite is probably the best card in the deck. And also, I put Tribute Mage in the deck because I want to be able to go get my Spellskite, right? That's very important as well. Again, I have a lot of phasing stuff, like Vidolian Illusionist, one of my personal favorites, because I am forcing my stuff to become the target of something. So someone casts a Swords, I can make my thing the target, draw the cards, and then respond by phasing it out so I don't actually lose it. Misdirection is another one where I can just change the target of something, obviously. And obviously, I am also getting lots of draw triggers. So I have stuff like Onerophage in here that I can take advantage of all the draw triggers I'm getting. I also have a little bit of a sub-theme here, because that theme didn't necessarily fit an entire deck. I have a sub-theme of Wizard Tribal here because my commander is a wizard that is just going to be sitting on the battlefield, and I'm not really going to be doing anything with it. So I have cards like Patron Wizard, which I can then tap. You know, I could tap my Patron Wizard. I can also tap my Rain to do stuff with it, right? Azami, Lady of Scrolls, is another one that I have in the deck, because I have lots of, not a lot, but a fair amount of wizards around. So I can tap my Azami to draw a card. I can also tap my commander to draw a card because it's just sitting there doing nothing for the most part. And also that fits the draw theme as well. Closing out the game was definitely an issue for this deck. Thran Golem is an interesting one. Again, fits the aura theme. He gets pretty big and scary. I do have Octopus Umbra. Again, closing out the game is a little bit difficult in a theme where you're doing that. I ended up throwing Psychosis Crawler in the deck because it is going to help me win the game off the draw triggers. So this is a great way to win a game if you plan on drawing a lot of cards, because of course, whenever you draw a card, it's going to deal 1 damage, or each opponent is going to lose 1 life. So I ended up throwing that in the deck to help me close out the game. It's a difficult deck to play for sure. I say all the time, monolith commanders are not great. So that means you basically need your commander in play in order for the deck to do something. And Rain, this is my one deck where it certainly is the case. This is a bit of a monolith commander deck where I sort of need my commander in play in order for it to do a whole lot. And then I need to get an aura on it as well. It's a difficult deck to play. It is certainly my least powerful deck. I have it as a 5. I would say of all my decks, it's the least powerful. I maybe have won 1 game with it, I think. I don't win a lot with it. It's interesting, though. It's interesting. It is fun. I don't play it a lot. I recently just played it, interestingly enough. And, you know, it was an interesting game. I don't have to win all the time, but certainly the power level is not there with this deck. All right, moving on to my Questing Beast deck. This is my only mono green deck. And when I saw this commander, I mean, it's just a great creature all around. But as a commander, how are you going to build it? And a lot of people would likely go to the Voltron strategy because, of course, your commander has a ton of abilities. And I did that a little bit here. But I like that my commander had Death Touch, so I did a little bit of Death Touch Tribal. And obviously, the best way to use that is with fighting effects. So Uvenwald Tracker will allow me to mostly kill any creature I want repeatedly. But I ended up going more with stuff that isn't going to have my commander die. Because obviously, when you're fighting, your commander is taking the damage as well. And my commander is not huge, right? So a card like Nature's Way is better because it has more the punching effect, right? Target creature you control gains vigilance and trample, and giving my commander trample is also handy. And then it deals damage equal to its power to target creature that I don't control. So that way I don't have to worry. I can kill a giant creature my opponent has without having to worry about losing mine. Roar of Challenge is really the best one because all creatures able to block target creature do so this turn. So I can force my opponent's team to block my commander, and it has Ferocious, and of course my commander has a power of 4, so my commander is going to gain Indestructible. So what happens is my commander gets Indestructible, I attack with it, my opponent's whole team has to block, and it essentially becomes a bit of a board wipe. So that's a great fit. I also put Barroom Brawl in here, which is a really interesting fight effect from Baldur's Gate, just a really fun card in a commander game. And so when I saw it, I thought that fits perfectly in my Questing Beast deck. I got Livewire Lash in here, absolutely fantastic fit because I am targeting my commander a lot with those fight effects. And whenever my commander becomes the target of a spell, even mine, this creature deals 2 damage to a creature or player. So what happens, because my commander has Death Touch, is I use a fight effect, kill one of my opponent's creature, the Livewire Lash triggers, deals 2 damage to, the Livewire Lash is not dealing the damage my commander is, so it's dealing 2 damage to another creature, which will then die because, of course, my commander has Death Touch, so that works great in the deck. I have a little bit of, Death Touch tribal, so I got other Death Touch creatures in here, like Occam Adversary, so that obviously the other things I'm doing in the deck work as well. I got Bow of Nylea, which is just a great card in a commander game in general, but my attacking creatures get Death Touch, so that fits the theme of what I am doing. I just have a couple of just really good creatures like Froghemoth, just a really fun, I saw this guy and I'm like, what a great card in a commander game. I threw it in the deck. I am in a attacky theme here, obviously. I got Toski, Bearer Secrets, again, just a great card draw. Obviously, my card draw is coming from my attacking, right? So I got Hunter's Insight, cards like that, so I can draw cards that way. I also am getting in for damage a lot, so One with Nature is one of my favorite cards in this deck, because whenever my commander connects or any of my Death Touch creatures, I get to go get a land and put it into play, a forest card and put it into play. I also have Mark of Sekiko, one of my favorites that fits really nicely in this deck because my commander connects. Assuming it's just a 4/4, I get to add 4 green mana that I can use on my second main phase. Other neat things I'm doing in the deck, my commander doesn't allow the damage from my creatures to be prevented, so I have a few fog effects. I was doing this a little bit more originally. I had quite a few fog effects in here. I got Lull, creatures deal no combat damage this turn, also has cycling if I don't really want to use it. So I can fog after maybe my opponents have declared blockers, and then their creatures damage is going to be prevented, but my creatures can't be prevented, right? My commander won't allow it. Sereth is just such a fantastic fit in this deck for a number of reasons. First of all, tap creatures you control have Death Touch, so that's going to fit the theme of giving my creatures Death Touch. More importantly, untapped creatures you control have Hexproof, and my commander has Vigilance, so my commander is never tapping. So that means my commander gets hexproof all the time. And this is a little bit of a Voltron strategy here. So giving my commander hexproof is fantastic. I also got Krosan Warchief because my commander is a beast. And this will allow me to regenerate my commander. Guardian Augmenter. As soon as I saw this card, that automatically slotted into the deck because it makes my commander bigger. Also gives it hexproof as well. Power Matrix, one of my all-time favorites. Just giving my commander more of those keywords abilities. So just with this alone, it's such a fantastic fit in the deck because my commander doesn't have Flying, First Strike, or Trample. So it's giving my commander all of those abilities and the +1/+1. So my commander becomes Death Touch, Haste, Vigilance, Flying, First Strike, Trample, 5/5 with just those 2 cards. And then of course the First Strike and the Death Touch work extra good together, which is why I put Bladed Pinions in the deck. This is a weird equipment that you probably would never see in any other deck, but I think it works really, really good with Questing Beast because giving your commander Flying and First Strike means that it becomes you can just attack at will, and your opponent can only block with flying creatures, obviously, and if they do, their creature's going to die first because your commander has First Strike and Death Touch, and also your commander has Vigilance, so now you can block anything as well. So this is really a fantastic equipment in the deck. It's an interesting deck. It's kind of fun. It's a little bit of mono green good stuff. I actually ended up shoehorning maybe too many mono green good stuff cards in the deck that ended up taking out because I got too far away from where I originally was with the deck. I like it. It certainly isn't powerful. I have it as a 5. So, I would say it's probably my second least powerful deck. I win with it from time to time. Not a lot. Interestingly enough, I have the gameplay video on my channel where I play my Questing Beast deck and actually do win with it. So you can check that out if you want to. Let's move on though. Again, remember I have these in order from the ones that I don't really go after a lot when I want to actually play a game, getting up to the ones that I play the most. So next is my Dragonlord Dromoka deck. This is, again, as you can probably tell, a proxy. I found this one online. I thought it was a super sweet art. I don't love the original art, so I end up using this one. And this is my one deck where my commander is not integral to my deck at all. This deck is not built around my commander. This is the one exception to that rule where I'm not actually building around my commander. I mostly chose this as my commander because your opponents can't cast spells during your turn, which is important in this deck because it's a combo deck. This is my, I have combos in other decks, but this is my one straight up combo deck. And the deck is entirely built around essentially two cards, that being Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, because I want to make all of my opponents' lands into swamps, and Painter's Servant, because I want to make everything black. That is the crux of the deck. I want to make everything black, and I want to make everything into swamps. I can do either or. Obviously, I have cards like Crop Rotation, so I can go get my Urborg and put it into play. I also have lots of stuff that tutors for creatures, obviously, which isn't hard in green, to go get my Painter's Servant. And then I take advantage of that with cards like Elephant Grass. There's lots of these, right? So black creatures can't attack me. If all creatures are black, then I can't be attacked at all. Obviously, I have one of my favorite color-specific cards, Compost. So I'm just going to be drawing a ton of cards off of that. Really funny one that I found is Pygmy Kavu, that when it enters the battlefield, I draw a card for each black creature my opponent controls. So this can draw me a ton of cards if I have my Painter's Servant in play. Again, I just like to shoehorn some of my old favorites in decks like Mystic Enforcer. Even though it's not necessarily the best fit in the deck, I just love this card and it fits in the deck because it has protection from black, right? So if I have Threshold, it ends up becoming a 6/6 flying creature that has protection from essentially everything if my Painter's Servant is in play, right? So I always like to shoehorn cards like that in decks. But how I'm going to win the game is with cards like Angry Mob, a really old card that on my opponent's turn is going to have power and toughness equal to the 2 plus the number of, no, it's going to be 2 during your turn below or equal to the total number of swamps an opponent controls during any other player's turn. It's 2 plus 0. Yeah, so it's 2 plus, I'm reading the old errata text, or the old non-errata text here. On your turn, it's 2 plus the number of swamps your opponents control. And of course, your opponents are going to control a whole lot of swamps if your Urborg is in play. Crusading Knight is the newer version of this. This one has protection from black. The Angry Mob has Trample, which kind of makes it better for closing out games. But if I have my Painter's Servant in play, this guy has protection from everything because it has protection from black and also gets +1/+1 for each swamp I control. So that can be better in those situations. It just depends on which. I also have Karma in the deck, which can close out the game really, really fast because everyone's going to be losing a life equal to the number of swamps they control, which is a lot if I have my Urborg out. I got Chalet, Voice of Plenty to protect my stuff. I got a lot of protection in here because also obviously I have to protect my Painter's Servant mostly. It is an artifact creature. It dies really, really easy. I also have lots of ways to get it back out of my graveyard if it does die. And since this was a combo deck, I also threw another green-white combo, which doesn't really fit with anything else I'm doing in the deck, but does fit in the deck. So I threw it in here. Tornado with Solemnity. So that works. Solemnity kind of works. It does hose a lot of strategies. So you could just throw this in a deck and it might work for you. But it works particularly well with Tornado because, well, you can read the card. I'm not going to go over the whole thing. I talk about it in a short, actually. It's one of my favorite combos. It fit in the deck, so I threw it in here. It's a little bit of it's not a one-trick pony, more a two-trick pony, right? So that's one of the reasons why I don't play it a lot, because I am doing a lot of the same stuff, but it is a really interesting deck that is doing a whole lot of things that you've probably never seen before in a Commander game. And I actually do get a lot of requests from my patrons to play against it because they want to see it in action. That's pretty much the only time I play it, is just when people request to play against it. It's not a super powerful deck because obviously I have to make sure things get assembled in order for it to work well. I would say it's probably a 6 as far as power level goes. I have it ranked 8th as far as the decks I actually want to play from time to time. It's sort of around in the middle. All right, moving on to my oldest deck, which is my A Name Is One deck. And this is the original deck when I changed the strategy, and I've talked about this in a few videos, where I'm like, okay, having a really underwhelming, bizarre commander is, I think, a great strategy in a commander game because you're not going to be a target. People are going to see your goofy commander that doesn't really look like, I have to have it in my hand in order for it to be good. It costs an absurd amount of mana. It's not the most expensive commander in the entire format, but I'd say it's probably the hardest to cast because of the color restrictions. It's just so goofy. Most people have never seen it before, really unpopular. I can take advantage of that, right? But of course, how am I going to build around it? And having your commander in your hand used to be really, really difficult. Obviously, the only way to do it when I put this deck together was command beacon. So I needed my command beacon, and I thought, okay, well, another thing I could do is get a Urborg and a Cabal Coffers in play. And interestingly enough, this is my second deck that I have where I really want Urborg in play. So I'm doing a lot of the land tutoring thing. Obviously, like Tempt with Discovery is probably the best card in the deck because the lands theme is sort of the sub theme of the deck, right? I want at least 3 lands in play. That's the minimum, right? So that's why Tempt with Discovery is great because it can allow me maybe to get 4. I want my Cabal Coffers and my Urborg, obviously, for the mana because my commander is insanely expensive. But I also want my command beacon because I have to sacrifice it to get my commander into my hand. So I have a land sub-theme here, and I have Raminep Excavator and cards like that to get my lands out of my graveyard so I can reuse them again. I have cards like Nylea's Intervention, right? When I first saw this, I was like, oh, that lets you get any number of lands. They go to your hand, but still... I have a lands sub-theme in here, and I have a lot of lands that are, utility lands that are helping me out. As time went on, though, I got other assists like Road of Return. This allows me to get my commander out of the command zone, right? Interestingly enough, it's green, so as soon as I saw it, that's going my name is 1 deck. Then they came out with Netherborn Altar, which allows you to get your commander out of the command zone. And interestingly enough, it's black, so it went right in my name is 1 deck. And now I've recently added Campfire, which also does that. So I don't have to rely on the land theme as much because I don't absolutely need Command Beacon. I have other ways to get my commander out of the command zone. And obviously I want to do it more than once. I don't want to just cast my commander once, get that spirit, right? Because that's what it does. And then, never do it again. I want to do it a couple of times. So having other ways to do that is great. I ended up throwing Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth in the deck because it is a lands theme where it's very easy for me to go get non-basic lands out of my deck. But also, I had a little bit of an issue with green mana. Obviously, having Urborg in play, I have no problem with the black mana. I was starting to have a little bit of an issue with green mana. So having Urborg and Yavimaya in play, of course, allows my lands to tap for green or black, which is great. I got Heartless Summoning in the deck, which is great. Allows me to cast my commander for 2 cheaper. I don't care that it has -1/-1, and a lot of other creatures in the deck. That is the case as well, right? This is essentially a Spirit Tribal deck. I got Steely Resolve in here. I don't want to be equipping any of my creatures or anything like that, so just giving all my spirits Shroud is fantastic, especially my commander. It is important that my commander dies and doesn't get exiled, so that's why I wanted to have Shroud. A lot of my creatures, because I have again a little bit of recursion theme here, that as well is really, really important. Grave Waker, right? So I don't want my stuff exiled is what I'm getting at. Grave Waker is a spirit. This is one that I can go get and has a recursion ability. 7 mana, that's a lot, but I have a lot of mana, so I don't really care about that. Remember, I'm going to have a lot of lands in play and likely Urborg and Coffers as well. So just being able to pay 7 mana to get a creature out of my graveyard is not a problem. I was really looking forward to Neon Dynasty because I knew I would there's not a lot of great green and black spirits, as you can probably imagine, but we got a couple more. I got Kuro the Boundless Sky, which I threw right in the deck. Also works with the land theme, which is funny. I was like, wow, what a great fit. Search your library for 3 land cards and put them into your hand. So it fits with the land theme as well. Of course, I also threw Junji in here as well. Obviously, that fits with the graveyard theme. So having 2 great spirit dragons that fit perfectly in my deck was also that was great to see. I was waiting a while for that set to come out so I could add a couple. I don't add deck cards to this deck very often, but those had to go right in there. And then of course I have the oldies but the goodies, and you can probably see this is a very worn old card. I've had this in my collection for a long, long time. This was the OG. The OG butt kicker, whatever you want to call it, right before Emrakul was ever around. This was the go-to. It was a big, flying, scary creature that you could beat down your opponents with. I mean, power creep, am I right? Times have changed, but this was the OG because back in the day, creatures, really big, scary creatures, always had horrible downsides, and Spirit of the Night didn't have one. So it was just a big, scary creature that you could have attack immediately and start beating your opponents with. By today's standards, it's not great, but I had to throw it in the deck because it's just one of those cards, those nostalgic cards that also happens to be a spirit. And funny enough, I do get it a lot. A lot of times when I originally cast my commander, I'll get a Kokoshu a lot. If my life total is getting low, that's, I can recur that. It's a little bit of a win con in the deck. I will, but a lot of times I'll just go get Spirit of the Night, just start attacking my opponents with it. It's my oldest deck. It's obviously a ton of nostalgia. I don't love that it's built around, I get Cabal Coffers and Urborg into play, because obviously a lot of people do that. But the deck is so unique and original that at the end of the day, I don't think that matters a lot. I don't play it a ton just because it is my oldest deck and I've played it a lot, so I don't go after it a lot. Again, it is another deck that I get requests for to play against just because it is so unique and interesting. Certainly, I would say that as far as going after it to play, I don't do a lot, but it is probably the deck that is closest to my heart because it is my oldest deck, and also, again, is the beginnings of me sort of going after that deck building strategy that I use for everything now. All right, moving on to my Patron of the Kitsune deck, and I think this is probably Anima's one is my oldest deck. I believe Tashana is my second oldest deck, and this would probably be my third oldest deck. And as you can imagine, it is a life gain theme. I'm doing the Fox offering thing a little bit, and again, was looking forward to Neon Dynasty coming out because I knew I would get some more Foxes for this deck, and there was a couple that I threw in here. Obviously, I want to use that Fox offering, right? This is a great one because it has an enter the battlefield and dice trigger, which is a perfect fit, right? Because obviously I'm going to be sacrificing it to that Fox offering. And like I say all the time, it's such an underrated ability, right? With this 7-tail mentor in play, my commander costs 2 mana. That's it. 2 mana, flash it out, and then on my turn, I can immediately start going to town. And this ability, whenever a creature attacks, you gain 1 life. I've said before, I think is the best life gain ability of any commander. This is any creature. Your creature's attacking, your opponent's creature's attacking, so it's very easy to get life gain triggers on your opponent's turn. So that's why a card like Crested Sunmare is an absolute bomb in this deck. Interestingly enough, I just played this deck the other day, got my Crested Sunmare out, was creating a horse token on almost every single turn because people are attacking all the time, right? And at the beginning of each end step, if I've gained life, and if someone attacked, that means I've gained life, I get a horse. So I'm just making horses like crazy. Archangel Athun is the other super bomb in the deck. Again, you want life gain triggers. You don't care about the amount of life. You care about, I'm gaining life, individual triggers, which cards like Archangel of Thune say whenever you gain life. So you want as many triggers as you can. And with Patron of the Kitsune, it's whenever a creature attacks. So if your opponent or you attack with 5 creatures, that's 5 separate life gain triggers. So that means your Archangel Athun is putting 5 +1/+1 counters on your entire team. Things get really out of hand fast when I have that guy in play. Cleric class is a nice little added bonus that I threw in here a little while ago. Whenever you gain life, gain that much +1. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So it's a little bit of a downgraded Archangel of Thune, obviously, but fits nicely in the life gain theme. There's a ton of stuff that you can put in the mono white life gain theme. I talked about this recently, how there's so much support now, even for just a mono white life gain theme, that I'm finding it really hard to take cards out, right? I mean, Well Lost Dreams, phenomenal card draw effect. I even have lots of great card draw options for a life gain theme, and it's getting really hard to shoehorn stuff into here. One of the interesting cards I threw in recently is Ranger of Eos. This is actually a patron suggestion that I threw in here. Now, why would I throw this in here, right? Go and get 1 mana value creatures out of your deck? Well, that's because, again, I want life gain triggers as much as possible. And obviously, I have a couple of fantastic 1 mana value creatures here that are really great at getting you those life gain triggers, whether it be on your turn or your opponent's turn, right? Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant. And another 1 mana value creature that I added recently, a Leonin Elder. I talked about this in my 10 cards video. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, you may gain 1 life. And this is almost becoming better than a Soul Warden in today's meta in Commander because of the treasure tokens. Every time someone makes a treasure token, you get to gain a life. You're getting an absolute ton of life gain triggers. Right? Again, that's what we want here in this deck off of this card. So that's why I threw Ranger of Eos in the deck. I got a couple other I got Esper Sentinel in here too. I can go get that if I want to. But Ranger of Eos is great in this deck, even though it seems like it doesn't necessarily fit the strategy. Another new addition in this deck phase steed that I talked about in a 5 cards video, which is great because I do want to be attacking a lot. I can give my commander indestructible or another creature. Also, my stuff becoming targeted, get to draw cards. I think it's a great fit in the deck. As usual, I have some of my all-time mono white favorites in this deck, like Crackdown. This is just kind of an easy fit into any mono white deck because it doesn't hurt you at all, obviously. And I got Eye of Singularity in here as well. I just love it. It really hoses token strategies and it hoses treasures strategies, right? Because those are same name. So it really is a fun card. It doesn't necessarily fit in this deck. I just threw it in here because I love it. And I always throw cards in decks that I love. But again, interestingly enough, I came across a sort of combo or an interesting interaction with Crested Sunmare. I had Crested Sunmare and I had my Eye of Singularity in my hand, and I thought, okay, well, if I play my Eye of Singularity, it's going to destroy all those horse tokens, but guess what? They're indestructible. So it actually works really, really well because the horse tokens, as I create them, they will try to destroy all the other horse tokens, but of course, they're indestructible, so it doesn't do anything. So it was a really interesting interaction that I discovered recently. And funny enough, I was playing against one of my patrons' Kazul decks, and that's why I played it, because the Kazul Ogre tokens, as they got created, destroyed each other. So another really interesting way to use that card. I love this deck. It's one of my oldest decks. It is in the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have it at number 6 as far as the cards, the decks I really like to play. But of course, a lot of the decks at the top of the list are going to be newer decks because you're always going to go to grab probably the newer decks that you really want to play. I have this as a power level of 7. It's a pretty powerful deck. I don't lose with it a ton. I tend to do fairly well with it. I love it a lot. All right, getting into the top 5 here, right? So top 5, and that is my Dennick deck coming in at number 5. I just thought it was an interesting commander. A lot of people were poo-pooing on it when it first came out. And the reason why is because of an ability that was fairly new at the time, right? Which was the trigger only once each turn. Now I think we're all used to it, so we don't really get turned off of cards when they say that. But at the time, that trigger only once each turn was a fairly new idea. And so when you saw that, you're like, oh, trigger only once each turn? But it's really easy to do. It's really easy. This is a creature card going into a graveyard from anywhere. So the way I play this deck, again, the way you play your decks can be really, really important. And the way I play this deck is really important. I have a lot of creatures. So what I ended up doing with the deck is I have a lot of creatures like Benevolent Bodyguard that are sacrificing themselves. So what I do is I play the deck in that if it's my opponent's turn and they have a creature die, that's a creature going to a graveyard, I get the trigger off my commander. If the turn has gone through without that happening, I sacrifice this guy, or I sacrifice one of my other guys. Like I have lots of Judge's Familiar, right? Just low mana value creatures with sacrifice abilities that I can use on my opponent's turn that is going to trigger my commander and guarantee me that I get that clue. Lots of that, right? Cathar Commando is obviously a fantastic fit in the deck, right? My opponent milled themselves. They put a creature in the graveyard. Okay, so I wait till the next turn. I get my clue. I go to the next turn, and then nothing has gone to the graveyard, so I sack my Cathar Commando, get rid of that Rhystic Study or whatever, and then I get the trigger again. Right? So every turn, I want to be getting that clue token, and getting 4 clue tokens in a turn cycle, I think is pretty good. Obviously, I have a low mana value sacrifice sort of recursion theme here. Really, one of my all-time favorite cards that I think maybe should get played more in the format is Return to the Ranks, which returns X target creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Obviously, I can just get back 5, 6, 7 creatures with this very easily. Perfect fit in the deck because like 90% of the creatures in this deck are mana value 2 or less, and they're all those value-y creatures like the Cathar Commando. I have a lot of those sacrificed to protect. I don't want my commander to die. In fact, most of the time that I have played this deck, and you can, again, I played this one on my channel. You can go check out. I'm pretty sure I cast my commander and it never left the battlefield for the entire game. Usually when I play this deck, that is the case. I also have great stuff like Abiding Grace, which it only gets mana value 1, but there is almost always a mana value 1 creature in my graveyard that I can keep getting back and back over again, right? So just great value there. So there's a little bit of a recursion theme. I am doing the clue token theme, so Urdwald Illuminator, it's a 2 mana value creature, fits that theme, also doubles my clue tokens, so that's great. I also have a little bit of a sacrifice theme here, right? Azoria Sacrifice. So World Queller's a fantastic fit here. This is such a fantastic fit in so many decks, I think. Again, I get to choose the thing that's going to get sacrificed. So, and again, this is a card that I actually had in action in that video. If you want to check it out in action, I can choose, because I have a bunch of clue tokens lying around, I can very easily choose Artifact, sacrifice one of the clue tokens I don't need, and everyone has to sacrifice an artifact. Or I can choose Creature, because obviously I'm in a creature sacrifice theme. So it's a fantastic fit there. I love Abjure in this deck. This is a really underrated counterspell in the format. It's just a hard counterspell. Counter target spell for 1 blue mana. That's pretty good. But you have to sacrifice a blue permanent. But of course, I want to be sacrificing things. I just sacrifice one of my blue creatures and I can counter a spell. And then I get the trigger off my commander, right? So that's a really nice fit. Obviously, Luminous Broodmoth, a fantastic fit here. Any of my creatures that I'm sacrificing that don't have flying, I just get another kick at the can, if you will, right? Because they're going to come back into play with a flying counter on them. Great fit in the deck. Junk Winder. Any blue deck that is making tokens, this guy is fantastic. I just completely, in a couple of games I've played with this deck, completely locked down my opponents, where I just make a clue token, tap down their best thing, make another clue token, and I'm just tapping stuff down. It doesn't untap during the next untap step, so I don't have to keep tapping down the same thing. I can pick something different. This is a great, especially late in the game, it can really shut down my opponents. A really, really interesting fit in the deck is Grand Architect. And one of the issues I found with this deck, and again, people don't like the trigger only once each turn thing, I was making so many clue tokens that I couldn't sacrifice them all to draw cards. And this is a really interesting way to do this. It gives my blue creatures an anthem, which helps to close out the game. I can turn artifact creatures blue. I don't think I've ever done that. Tap an untapped blue creature you control. Add 2 colorless. Spend this only to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. And of course, my clue tokens are an activated ability of an artifact. So I can use this guy. This guy can tap himself to sack a clue token. This basically becomes tap draw card in this deck. Any blue creature in my deck essentially becomes tap draw card with my Grand Architect in play, right? So he's a fantastic fit in the deck for turning those clue tokens into card draw, because of course it can be mana intensive. And again, one of my all-time personal favorites, Thran Turbine. This adds 2 colorless on my upkeep that I can only use to essentially activate abilities. So this becomes a 1 mana artifact that at the beginning of my upkeep I have to draw a card, because I just turn one of these. I turn that mana into a clue that's going to then draw me a card, right? A really weird fit that I threw in this deck. I was having a little bit of problem closing out games, and as you can see if you watch that video, I just attack with my small creatures. That's how I win with this deck. I threw even Mimeomancer in the deck because what this can do, this can shut down some of your opponent's creatures. It's interesting because you put a counter on your opponent's creature and it turns into a 3/1. So if your opponent has a Blightsteel Colossus, instead of it being a giant creature, it's just a 3/1. So it's way less scary. But also I can put these on my creatures. And what happens is I have a lot of little 1/1 creatures, like my Grand Architect, for example. Now instead of being a 1/3 is now a 3/1 flyer. So it becomes a lot more scary. So all my little non-flying creatures, or any creatures that are lying around, will now turn into a little bit scarier because they're now 3/1 flyers, so I can get in damage with them a lot easier. It's a little bit of a non-bow with the Luminous Broodmoth, but I just thought it would be an interesting fit. I might eventually take it out if I come across a card that is a better fit. Again, this is a deck where it's really hard to find room for stuff. I am undefeated with this deck, okay? And I have not played it in a long time. I love playing this deck, but I haven't played it. I played it once this entire year, in fact, and that was the gameplay video. That gameplay video where I played it was my 6-0 victory. I'm 6-0 with this deck. I have yet to lose with it. So I don't want to jinx myself, maybe. I haven't played this deck since that video, actually, which is kind of funny. I don't know. It's kind of neat to have a deck that you're undefeated with. You know what? I think maybe the next game I play with my patrons, I'll play this deck and see how it goes. Because I have made some changes, and I am eventually going to lose with it, but 6-0, pretty good for a janky theme like that. All right, moving on to my number 4 deck, and this is also my newest deck in my collection, and I should probably speed things up. I wonder if this video is going to be longer than my original video. So Kinzu of the Bleak Coven is the newest deck in my collection from Phyrexian All Will Be One, which just came out. I think it's a great commander, and once again, you can see there's a little bit of a theme here with the ETB strategy. A lot of my decks are very creature heavy because I just like ability stapled on creatures. I just think you get great value out of it pretty much for the most part. I would say like almost all of my decks are the value-y strategy of I just keep getting things back. I have creatures, I'm blinking them or recurring them, and I'm getting value off of them. And Kinzu is absolutely doing that. And funny enough is I had my Kuan Ogre Ascendant deck, and I haven't talked about the decks that I took apart this last year. Kuan is one of them. And the reason why is because it was just a sacrifice theme and it just wasn't super fun to play against. I tend to take apart decks that are just really not fun to play against because it's sort of a bad feel in general. I don't know. In a casual commander game, I don't love that. My Tajik deck is another deck that I took apart because that was doing a lot of just had a lot of cards in there that are just sort of hating on a lot of different things. You can go check out that deck. I talk about it in my last video where I talked about my decks. I didn't have that deck for long. And my Kuan deck I didn't have for long either because they just weren't fun to play against. And interestingly enough, when I saw this, I was like, man, you know what? A lot of those cards that I had in that deck probably fit in this deck. And they very much did. This was one of the easiest decks I've ever had to put together. Other than Kinzu, I think I might have maybe ordered like 4 cards because I either already had the cards or I had the cards from my Kuan deck, which fit perfectly in this theme because it's a sacrifice theme at the end of the day. And again, I'm in a little bit of the ETB strategy here because I love that kind of stuff. A card like Shriekmaw is a perfect fit here. It's that ETB creature that comes into play. I get value off of it when it enters the battlefield. Then I can sacrifice it. And of course, because it has Evoke, it's extra good here, right? When my creature dies, I get that token copy of it. So it comes into play. I can evoke it. It immediately dies. It comes back into play and I can destroy another creature. So just great, fantastic value there. Obviously, I have Nightmare Shepherd in the deck because it's doing essentially the same thing as my commander. It's a bit of a backup for my commander, though. I don't want them both out at the same time. So if I have it in my hand and I have my commander out, I'll just hold it in my hand. Obviously, Plague Crafter, again, fits the sacrifice theme. I can have this enter the battlefield, sacrifice itself. Everyone else has to sacrifice or discard. Then it immediately comes back into play. Or I shouldn't say it comes back into play. I create the token copy of it, right? And then everyone has to sacrifice again. I can either sacrifice the token I just made or I can sacrifice another creature that I want to be sacrificing. So obviously I have lots of those effects in the deck. I guess I should mention that you do have the toxic theme here. I didn't build around that at all. It's a little added bonus. I guess I could help win the game that way. I have a ton of creatures ETBing all the time, including the tokens that I am making. So Ayara is a phenomenal fit here. And in fact, the first time I played this deck, I won with Ayara by draining out my opponents because I have say Shriekmaw enter the battlefield, get the trigger off my commander or get the trigger off my Ayara. It dies. I get the token, which is black, and I get another trigger off of it. So it's a great drain effect and obviously has the sacrifice as well. So just a phenomenal fit in the deck. Another phenomenal fit in the deck, Saw in Half. I grabbed a copy of this right away pretty much because I thought at some point I'm going to have a deck where this is a nice fit. This card fits in a lot of decks. I could probably put this in my Name is One deck maybe. But again, I'm one of those guys that when you have a card like this that fits in so many decks, I don't want to be putting it in all my decks. I just find one deck where it's a great fit and I put it in there and it is a perfect fit here. I have a lot of those ETB creatures that I can saw in half. I get the dice trigger. I get more token copies. It's such a perfect fit in this deck, right? So obviously I slotted it in there right away. I'm in the sacrifice theme, so I threw a lot of my favorites like Hostile in here, which is a phenomenal fit. You know, if you want sack outlets, and of course in this deck I do. Gift of Doom. This is a card I'm going to talk about in a video coming up because I don't think it gets played enough. It is such a phenomenal. It's a little bit of a sack outlet, so it fits in the sack theme, but it's just a great way to protect your commander. And of course, I don't want my commander to be dying. Again, this is a little bit of a monolith deck, a little bit, where I really want my commander to stick in play so that I could be taking advantage of its ability. Font of Agonies is the one card that didn't fit in the Kuan theme at all that absolutely fits here because, of course, my commander wants me to pay 2 life to use that ability. And whenever you pay life, you're putting counters on this. So it just fits specifically with Kinzu. So that's one of the few cards that I actually ordered specifically for this deck. And again, my personal favorites. And this is why a lot of times I will decide to put decks together in papers because I get to use some of my old favorites like Garza's Assassin. Absolute perfect fit in this deck. rather than the ETB, it is a sacrifice. So I have my Guards' Assassin come into play. I sacrifice to destroy a non-black creature. Obviously, it's dying. Then it comes back into play, and I can use its ability again. I've always loved the art in this card as well. Another one of my personal favorites that I've always been looking to shoehorn into a deck is Devouring Strassus. Just one of those big scary creatures from back in the day. 9/9 flying trample, but it has a great sacrifice outlet where I can regenerate it. And again, this NIR is the reason I won the very first game I played with this, because it's a sack outlet. So what I did is I just ended up sacrificing a bunch of my creatures that then became token copies. I sacrificed them to Devouring Strassus, and in fact, I sacrificed Devouring Strassus to itself. I sacrificed it to its own ability, and then it came back into play as a 1/1 token, and that's how I won. The one life there is what ended up killing my opponent and how I won the game. So that's pretty interesting. And then I had to throw Hecatomb in this deck. I believe I recently talked about this in my Black Enchantments video. It's a card I've been wanting to make work forever. I was so close the first game I played with this deck, funny enough. And one of my opponents cast an offer you can't refuse and countered it, unfortunately. But very easy for me to have the 4 creatures in play that I can, obviously, if this fits the sacrifice theme, then I get to tap all my lands to ping my opponents. It's my newest deck, and already it's one of my favorite to play. Again, there's recency bias where it's a new deck, so I want to play it. So that plays into it as well, but it's doing everything I want in a deck. The ETBs, the sacrifices, the value he plays, all that kind of stuff. I immediately, when I saw this commander, I'm like, I think I might build a deck around that. I put it together incredibly fast, as you could probably tell, because it's a Phyrexia all will be one commander. So, I ordered it pretty much as soon as I could get my hands on one. And again, I pretty much had the deck already made because it's essentially my Kuon Ogre Ascendant deck, but a little less unfun, right? So that's why I ended up taking that deck apart and putting this one together. I'd say it's pretty powerful. It's about a 7, right? I won my very first game I played with it. So not too shabby. All right, moving on to my third favorite deck to play, which is my Benny Brax deck. And there's quite a bit to talk about here, so I'll try to keep it brief. This is a deck that, again, famously, I thought this guy was going to be like the most popular mono-white commander. Drawing cards, token theme, which is a wide open strategy. Nobody likes it. I don't understand why. It also has Convoke, which actually is very relevant because it's really easy to recast your commander. Originally, I did just a boring old token strategy, just sort of a good stuff token strategy that I just put a whole bunch of cards that I liked that played token strategies, and it didn't work great. It was a little bit of a monolith commander theme where I just kind of needed my commander in play in order to get the card draw off of it, and I found that I was not playing my commander until I had stuff that could make tokens, and I just didn't love it. I didn't love it at all. So very recently, I made some drastic changes to the deck. Now, I do still have some of the, like Defiler of Flesh is just a great fit in the deck. Obviously, I can pay the Phyrexian mana to cast stuff, but also it's making tokens. So it's just a great fit in the deck. But I went with a very different theme. And funny enough, again, I'm in the ETB strategy. This is like my 4th deck that is sort of in that ETB strategy. And the reason why, there's 3 cards that I decided to go this route with, why I decided to completely change how I built this deck. The first being, again, one of my all-time favorites, which is Seance. I love this card. I had a modern deck that used Seance that I actually had quite a decent winning percentage with, where I just have a whole bunch of ETB creatures, Eternal Witness, Rex Age, all that kind of stuff. Again, all those favorite cards that I love to play. I would just play them normally, and then they would just die. I'd block with them, or I would, they'd die to a board wipe removal, whatever. I'd fill up my graveyard with those ETB creatures, and then I would slap down a Seance. And at the beginning of each upkeep, you get a creature back, and you are creating a token copy of it, right? You're not getting that creature back. You are exiling it from your graveyard and getting a token copy. So that's why it fits with Benny Brax, because when I slap this down, every single upkeep, and of course in Commander, there's a lot more upkeeps to be using this. Every single upkeep, I'm getting that token copy of that creature, so I will guaranteed be getting the trigger off my commander on the end step. So it fits really nicely there, and it also fits really nicely in the ETB theme. Again, that's how I built that deck in Modern. And another card that came out recently that fits really nicely in the token creation and ETB theme, right? Can anybody guess the card that fits the in a mono white deck that fits the token creation and ETB strategy both? That's right, it is Preston the Vanisher. And I imagine I could probably make some adjustments and just turn this into a Preston deck. But this guy fits phenomenally in the 99 because I'm doing the ETB strategy, which of course works great with Preston because you're not casting them. And when you do, you're creating an 0-1 white illusion, which is creating tokens, which gets me the trigger off my commander. So it was like Seance and this, and I was like, okay, there's a couple of cards that work really, really great in the token also ETB strategy, right? And the token strategy works good with ETB because when you create a token copy of something, you're getting that ETB, right? So that's why it works good. And again, the third card, which prompted me to switch to this strategy, was Dollhouse of Horrors, which is another card that I absolutely love from Crimson Vow, which I have in a couple of decks actually because it fits nicely in the ETB strategy. But again, is creating tokens. And this is sort of doing similar to what Seance is doing, where it is exiling cards from my graveyard. So I probably don't want to get both of them. Either or is good. I have those ETB creatures, my graveyard fills up, and then I just start exiling them from my graveyard, getting the ETB again, and then also I'm creating a token when I use this. So I get a card draw off of my commander. So that's what the deck became. Really funny fit in the deck is Spirit Bonds, that I guess whether you're doing the ETB strategy or not, could be a good fit because every time you have a non-token creature enter the battlefield, you can pay a white and get a spirit token, which is creating the token, get the trigger off your commander. But obviously it works in the ETB strategy as well because I'm having creatures that are ETBing. Obviously, I have all of the, typical exile, stuff like that I would be blinking creatures with, like Teleportation Circle, right? Conjure's Closet, Ephemerate, all that kind of stuff. So it is the ETB strategy combined with the token strategy. So of course I wanted to find a bunch of creatures like Resolute Reinforcements, which fit this enters the battlefield and creates a token. So it fits the token creation strategy and also fits the ETB strategy because I want to blink this. When I blink it, I get a token. Then I get to draw off my commander. Obviously, Abdel Adrian Gorian's Ward is a phenomenal fit here because it's fitting the ETB. I also exile other creatures so that I can reuse their ETBs again, and it's also making tokens. Again, I see this and I'm like, okay, well, that's a slam dunk in that deck, right? I also just have great ETB creatures that like Solitude that aren't doing the token thing at all. Just great ETB creatures. Hanged Executioner is a great one. Enters the battlefield, creates me that token, and then I can exile it, at some point to exile a creature as well. So it is essentially built around those three cards, Preston, Seance, and Dollhouse of Horrors, where I am doing the ETB strategy, but also doing the token creation strategy. It's such a fun deck to play. It's, again, very similar to the Kinzu deck, I guess, doing a lot of the things that I love to do, really great value-y plays. I'm always refilling my hand. Unsurprisingly, Benny Brax is a great card draw engine as a commander. I love this deck a lot. I am so glad I was almost honestly thinking about taking the deck apart because it was so kind of boring and run of the mill and just generically, token creation. And I decided to go with this more fringe strategy, and it ended up really making the deck interesting and fun to play. And I love it. I'm so glad I did that. All right, coming in at number 2 actually is my only mono red deck, and it is my Bralin deck. That's right, my partner without. This was just a sort of spur of the moment impulse thing where I had made the suggestion in one of my 10 deck ideas videos to do a partner without, where you don't play the partner for Bralin, which of course is Shabraz. You just do this guy and build around that. And I thought it was a doable concept. I'm in the mono red discard theme, and obviously I can also give Sharks Trample, and I thought it was funny that I could maybe throw I don't have Taurine Mauler in this deck, but I was joking around with my patrons the other day that I could throw Taurine Mauler in the deck because it has Changeling, so it's technically a shark. It also is doing the +1/+1 counter thing, which I do have a little bit of that theme here, but I could give my Taurine Mauler Trample, right? It is a big vanilla creature that I could give Trample by paying 1 red mana. So I might throw that in the deck just on a on a lark. I think it's a little funny. So I could actually use that ability. But this is a mono red discard theme, and I just played this deck the other day, and I just really love it. It works so well. And, I've talked about, Patron of the Kitsune being a mono white life gain theme, and there's so much support there that it's hard for me to even fit cards in that deck. And even this, it's hard for me to find room in this deck. I just put a couple more great cards in this deck, and it's so hard to find room just in a mono red discard theme without the partner at all. I'm having a hard time finding, room for stuff to put in this deck. One of the first cards I put in this deck, which I absolutely love, is Harmonic Prodigy. Whenever a shaman or wizard triggers, it triggers an additional time. Of course, my commander is a shaman. So whenever I get that discard trigger, it's going to trigger twice with Harmonic Prodigy. Slam dunk. I actually have a couple other wizards and shamans in this deck that will be benefiting from that as well. Obviously, I'm in the discard theme. I got Surly Badgesaur in here. And anything else in the mono red theme, there's actually quite a bit that is benefiting me off discarding. Obviously, I have Madness cards. I got Blazing Root Walla here, which is just a 1/1 that you can pump, but it's free. I'm just getting free value. I'm discarding anyway. So 0 mana, I put a creature into play. Why not, right? It's just free value. I'm also the sort of sub-theme here, and I know people will say, oh, well, there's not that much mono-red discard support, but there's another sub-theme that I'm doing in this deck because, of course, the way I'm winning with this deck is my commander's ability where I'm dealing 1 damage to each of my opponents, which is what, when people play Shabraz and Browlin deck, combining the two, that's usually how they win with it. So that's what I'm doing. So I have a sub-theme in the deck of I'm dealing damage to my opponents. And Torbrand, of course, is going to increase the damage that I'm doing. So whenever I trigger my commander's ability, I'm now dealing 3 damage. That's pretty good. And again, just like the Patron of the Kitsune deck, it is individual instances of triggering that I want, right? Gratuitous Violence will do the same, right? Whenever a creature I control would deal damage to a permanent or player, this works with attacking, but it also works with a commander's ability. I'm dealing double damage there. There's a ton, right? This was a recent one that came out in Brothers War, Mechanized Warfare. Whenever a red or artifact source you control deals damage to an opponent or opponent controls, it deals that much damage +1. So this is going to double my commander's ability. There's so much support there for that. And then again, anything that's doing the non-combat damage thing, because my commander is doing non-combat damage, so I got Chandra's Incinerator in here. So as I'm dealing damage to my opponents, I can then start dealing damage to their creatures as well. I have other creatures that fit that theme, like Hazaret the Fervent. Also, this is a discard outlet. Obviously, I got lots of discard outlets in the deck as well, because I'm going to need them. This is a discard outlet, but also fits the theme of it deals 2 damage to each of my opponents. So fits with all those cards I just mentioned. This fits as well. With a Torbrand in play, this is now dealing 4 damage to each of my opponents. With a Gratuitous Violence, same thing. It's dealing 4 damage to each of my opponents. So that's going to fit. It also fits with Chandra's Incinerator and all that as well. Thundering Reiju is a really great card that I ended up slotting into this deck that fits really nicely because it is doing the damage to each of my opponents thing. It's also doing the modified theme, which of course my commander is putting counters on itself. And I got a couple of just absolute slam dunks in this deck. And that's why it's becoming really hard for me to fit stuff in here because I just got 3 absolute slam dunks in this deck just in the last year, Scavenged Brawler being one of them. You know, I did have a little bit of an issue closing out the game with this deck originally. And the funny thing is my commander kept getting bigger and bigger and I wasn't attacking with it. And this is one of the ways that I can attack with my commander because obviously I want this in my graveyard so it fits the discard theme and also I can exile it from my graveyard and then I put 4 counters on my commander and it gets a Flying Vigilance, Trample, and Lifelink counter. So now my commander, I'm dealing damage to all my opponents anyway, but also I have a big, giant, scary commander that I can now just start slamming into my opponents as well. So what a fantastic fit this was in the deck. That went in there immediately as soon as I saw it, and so did Argenta Masticore. There's actually 2 cards here from Phyrexian All Will Be One that came out, and I'm like, well, those have got to go in the deck. Fits the discard theme, obviously, because it's discarding. And then also gets around the issue of mono red has sometimes issues dealing with, like, especially enchantments. So now I can use this to destroy stuff, like enchantments in particular. My opponent's got a Smothering Tithe Heuristic Study. This is a great way to get rid of them. And then Sulfum. I saw this guy and I'm like, okay, he's doing the, if a source you would control deals non-combat damage. So it fits that theme. I was like, that's a pretty good fit. And then I saw the ability, discard 2 cards to put a indestructible counter on it. Got to put it in there, right? Again, I was having trouble finding room in this deck, but I'm like, okay, it's doing the damage doubling thing. And then it's also got a discard outlet. I got to put it in there. So this is the most recent addition to this deck. I love this deck. It's great. It's not super powerful. I would say it's a 6 as far as power level goes, but it is definitely a deck that I just played it the other day. Love playing it. It's super fun. It's janky. It's out of the ordinary, but at the same time, it's not really that janky because I have so much great support in the mono red discard theme that, yeah, it's actually not super janky. It was really janky, I think, when I originally put it together. A little over a year ago, I put it together. but it very quickly became not so janky because there actually is a lot of support there. Again, even just recently, ton of great cards. I love this deck. It's tons of fun to play. But what is my favorite deck to play? Again, I'm ranking these decks on, how much appeal they have for me wanting to play them, right? Whenever a game, is on the horizon, my patrons want to play a game, which deck do I kind of want to grab first? And, I thought about it and I'm like, I think it's actually my Apashon deck. And it's weird to think that because I'm not a blue player at all. And in fact, I didn't have a mono blue deck for the longest time. I like having monocolor decks of each color. Mono blue was the last for me to make because whenever you think mono blue, everyone just thinks counterspells, right? Lots of counterspells, Cyclonic Rift, all these cards that people don't like. So I avoided playing a mono blue deck for the longest time. And I thought, okay, I want to have a mono blue deck, but it has to be a commander that it very much doesn't lend itself to the typical blue strategy, so that when people see my commander in the command zone, they'll think, oh, well, he's just playing Cephalid Tribal, right? Right? That's what I'm doing. And, I did the Cephalid Tribal thing a lot more originally. I'm doing it a lot less now. I more build around that last ability because that is actually a really powerful ability, which I will get more to. I do have 2 Cephalid in the deck. I used to have more. I still have Cephalid Constable, which I had originally put in the deck just because it's a great card, and there is some neat things I can do with this in the deck where I make it bigger. Cephalid Face Taker. I saw this one. I thought it was a neat card. And again, there's some neat things I can do here. It can't be blocked, which means that I can attack with it very easily. There's a couple of neat things you can do, like Fallow Sage I have in this deck because I have a little bit of a tapping theme, which I will get more to. And at the beginning of combat turn, you have Cephalid Face Taker become a copy of another target creature. So what I can do is I can copy my Fallow Sage with this, which wants to be tapped, and then I just very easily attack with it because it can't be blocked. And then I get to draw a card. So I can do stuff like that. Also, it's a Cephalid, so it fits the Cephalid Tribal theme. So I thought it was a neat fit in the deck. This is for sure my deck where I have a lot of really neat janky cards that I just like playing. The card that made me decide I'm going to make this deck, though, is Verity Circle. And this card came out in Ravnica Allegiance, right? And when it came out, I saw it and I'm like, man, whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, if it's not attacking draw card, that could be a really powerful ability. And I thought that alone was enough to build this deck because obviously with my commander, I can pay 3 blue, tap all non-flying creatures, and all my opponent, I'm basically drawing a card for every creature my opponents control. That's incredibly powerful. And of course, it's an enchantment, so I can do it over and over again. And I started doing some research and finding more cards like Theft of Dreams, which will draw me a card for each tapped creature target opponent controls. Not all my, it's not as good as Verity Circle, but it is still pretty good. Borrowing 100,000 Arrows is doing the same thing. So, and often what I'll do is I'll leave up the 3 mana, and then on my opponent's end step right before my turn, I pay the 3 mana, tap down all my opponent's creatures. Then on my turn, all my stuff untaps. My opponent's creatures are all tapped, which is great. I can very easily attack. I can cast my Borrowing 100,000 Arrows and draw a ton of cards. I can do a lot of things, right? I'm taking advantage of that. I can also use my, if my opponent has flying creatures, I'll get more to that because that's a bit of an issue. If my opponent has flying creatures, I can tap my commander to tap down their flying creature as well, or any of my other Cephalids. Other cards that take advantage of this, 1,000 Winds. This is another big play that I do in the deck where I'll cast this guy for his morph cost for 3, obviously. And then 7 is a lot, but I will pay 3 mana. There's a little bit of setup here. I'll pay 3 mana on my opponent's end step, tap all my opponent's creatures, and then on my turn, I'll pay the 7 and turn this face up and return all tapped creatures to owner's hand, which is returning all my opponent's creatures to owner's hand. Pretty good. My newest addition to the deck, I think, is Illithid Harvester, which, again, I can tap creatures. They don't untap. That's pretty good, the adventure side, but more so it's in the deck for the creature side, which is when it enters the battlefield, turn any number of tapped non-token creatures face down. They're 2/2 horror creatures. So, again, tap down all my opponent's creatures, and then the really problematic ones, I can now then turn them face down. And if you watch my Ixodron video, it sort of acts as an Ixodron, similar thing where my opponent's commander's face down, it could be a really hard time for them getting it face up. Again, getting to the classics, personal favorites of mine, Tradewind Rider, another reason I put this deck together. This is tapping my creatures. I have cards, again, like Fallow Sage, where use my commander's ability, tap my Fallow Sage, and when it becomes tapped, I get to draw a card. And I have a few cards like that in the deck. And also I can use it with Trade Wind Rider, where I have creatures that I want tapped. And Trade Wind Rider is just one of my personal favorites that I had to suffer against back in Standard, when I was playing in like Tempest Urza Saga Standard. It was a guy, I played against a guy in my LGS who had a Trade Wind Rider deck that was really tough to play against, and I've always had a bit of a soft spot for it, and this was the perfect deck to throw it in, so I couldn't wait to do so. Again, though, flying creatures were a problem for me, and I had a patron make a suggestion. I have a couple decks that I've made adjustments to because patrons made suggestions, and Archetype of Imagination, I can't believe I didn't put this in the deck originally. All my creatures have flying, and my opponent's creatures don't have flying, so now my commander's ability just becomes tap all of your opponent's creatures, and yours are fine. So pretty obvious fit in the deck. And then I also threw Mystic Decree in here. Old card, World Enchantment. All creatures lose flying and Island Walk. And obviously Island Walk isn't great for me either. It's not something you see a lot, but because I'm playing a mono blue deck, I don't want my opponent's creatures to have Island Walk. But all creatures lose flying. So now my commander's ability is going to affect all creatures, which is what I really want. Had a little bit of trouble closing out games. As I tend, when I build decks, I'm not just thinking about winning. I'm thinking about synergizing and doing fun, interesting things in my deck. I did end up throwing Hullbreaker Horror in the deck. Great creature. It doesn't really synergize with the deck a whole lot. It's just a great way to close out games. I also threw Charix, Raging Isle in the deck. Just big scary creature. I'm in a mono blue deck, so he's going to be enormous. Just a fun card in a commander game. I threw him in there. And I also threw Psychosis Crawler in this deck as well. I threw it in my Rain deck. Funny enough, I have this in both of my mono blue decks. In the Rain deck, it's more of I draw 2 cards, then I draw 2 cards, then I draw 2 cards. In this deck, it's more I cast my Borrowing 100,000 Arrows and I draw a whole bunch of cards. So all my opponents are going to lose like 5 or 6 or 7 life. Or I have my Very Circuit in play and I'm just drawing tons and tons of cards. There's more big swings of drawing cards where I can just hammer my opponent's life total with my Psychosis Crawler. Because I did have a little bit of it's just a super fun deck to play and it's so interesting and I'm doing a lot of things that I love. I did have a little bit of trouble closing out games and I do like to win. So I did throw some of these other things in there to help me win games because winning is kind of nice too. It's not the most powerful deck. I'd say it's probably a 6. I ranked all my decks and most of them are 6s or 7s, couple of 5s. Again, my Tashana deck is probably the only one that's an 8. For me, winning lots is not super important. Decks like my Abishon deck and my Bralin deck, and my Benny Brax deck, they're, I guess, my favorite decks to play, currently my favorite decks to play. I win with them okay, I guess, but not a lot. I just really like to play them, right? So winning is nice, but at the end of the day, there's certain decks that I just really have fun playing because I like the interactions. I like what they're doing. Also, the fact that I put them together and I have this sort of really janky theme sort of makes me want to play them more as well, I think. By the way, I'll give a shout out. Like I said, I'm not talking about my digital decks on this video, just my paper ones. I will give a shout out to my AO deck, which I absolutely love. That I talked about that on my channel. You can go check it out if you want to. I only have it in a digital copy right now. That would be my 3rd mono white deck, actually. And the deck is just so unique and interesting. It's a artifact theme. And the reason I don't have it together in paper, I absolutely would love to, is because I just have a lot of really expensive cards in that deck. So hopefully eventually I'll put it together. But because it is I want lots of 0 mana artifacts. That's why I decided to go with that theme, because AO is looking for any number of cards with total mana value 4. So any 0 mana things are essentially free. And of course, that fits the artifact theme. And of course, as we all know, a lot of those 0 mana artifacts, like the mana positive mana rocks, are going to be really, really expensive cards, like Mox Opal, stuff like that. Jeweled Lotus, obviously, really expensive cards. So it's a super expensive deck. I love it. It's tons of fun. It's also decently powerful, I would say. I win a decent amount with it. It's a deck that I hopefully will eventually put together in paper, but for now, it's going to take a while before I can get some of those really, really expensive cards, unfortunately. But that is it. That is all. There are my decks. Like I said, I wanted to do it a little bit differently. I ranked them in order of how much I like playing them, or how much fun I have playing with them, I guess. And then also, you guys want to see the actual paper decks. There they are. Like I said, some of my, I guess, newer decks are towards the top maybe because they're newer. Like my Browlin deck is only a little over a year old. My Benny Brax deck is about a year old, and my Kinzu deck is my newest deck, and those are all in the top 4. So maybe that plays into it a little bit. But my Abishon deck, I put at number 1. You know, again, I'm not a mono blue guy at all. Not even a little bit. But I just love playing that deck. I have fun with it every single time, and it's one of my oldest decks. It's my first mono blue deck I ever put together, and it is probably my 4th oldest deck. I would say A Name Is 1, then Tashana, then Patron of the Kitsune, and then Abishon, probably. If we're looking at order of oldness, maybe my Questing Beast deck is older than my Abishon deck. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell. I love that deck. It's tons of fun. Again, if you guys actually want to see me play some of these decks, I do have some gameplay videos on my channel. You can go check those out where I play, I believe I play my Denic deck, my Questing Beast deck, my Browlin deck, I think I play in one of the games. So you guys can go check those out. Or you can join my Patreon where I play all my decks all the time. And I have lots of gameplay videos already on my Patreon that you guys can check out if you want to do that as well. That is it. That is all, though. Really long video. Thanks for sticking in till the end. And I will see you guys next time. Thanks for tuning in.